So today we're making a asymmetrically welded adze. So I've seen a few historical items using this technique whereby the weld is actually only level with the throat beneath the socket. So I'm using 1¼ round, 6 inches of, and I've squared off the end so I can hold it in tongs. So I will start out by drawing out the opposite end of the bar to a section of 35 by 20 and about 4 inches long. And to save time and my elbow, I'm doing this under the power hammer. So the 1¼ round provides me with the meat to spread out for the sharp end of the adze. So once I have the 35 by 20, which I do, I will mark off inch from the end. And that's the first mark for the socket, and the second mark will be at 2½ inches. Now ideally I'd have gone up to 3½ inches, and I did further on. So heat it up, and same as making a folded axe, we're going to set down both the marks, but we're going to do the set downs on the same side of the material because this particular tool didn't actually have a pole. So the entire socket is an even thickness of around 10mm, I estimated. The adze that I'm actually reproducing is from the Flixborough tool hoard, which was Anglo-Saxon in origin. And I think from around the 8th or 9th century. So once I've done the set downs, I will start drawing out the material. We want it to be a thickness of 10mm and about 120mm long. I want the socket to protrude a little on the handle side of the head. So get that nice and even. So that is drawn out to 120mm, and it is 35 by 10 in section. So either side of the socket needs to come down to 20mm. Now obviously the material either side of the socket is thicker than the socket material itself. So I'm just going to bury that in the fire and leave the socket part out. And reduce to 20mm. And we're going for around 20 by 20. Like so. So the short end I'm going to taper, and that will act like a scarf, and I'm basically removing the shear plane from the metal because this will be folded and that chunky tab of 20 square will be welded below the socket. So taper all three sides. That will just help the material weld. So again, like the folded axes, bend it over the edge of the anvil. The socket material itself is a lot thicker than with the axe, but it's quite thick on the original as well. So make sure both set downs meet up, and you can see where I'm going with this now. So, I mentioned about cleaning out the fire before welding in my last video. A few people asked what that was all about, so this is basically it. It's a side draft. I don't have a clinker breaker at the bottom, so I have to dig out the clinker. I tend to do this before I'm welding, just because the clinker itself will raise the oxidizing layer of the fire. So you want it out of there because you want the oxidizing layer to be right at the bottom of the fire and a nice big neutral layer in the middle. That will just mean that you can get above a welding heat without actually burning your material. So once that's cleaned out, rebuild the fire, get it up to a nice molehill, which again helps keep a high neutral layer. Keeping the socket itself out of the fire, and I'm heating well below the weld area at first, just to preheat the material, and I'll get that close to a welding heat, and then pull the material back and then heat up the area to be welded. That just saves the rest of the bar sucking the heat out of the weld area. So it even blows. It's quite chunky material, so I was able to keep a welding heat in there for quite a while. Should really have turned the camera settings down a little bit so that you could see the metal itself. Did most of the weld with the big hammer, then moved on to my smaller ball peen to blend in the edges. Did a little bit too much blending and went a little thin right at the end of the taper. It wasn't the end of the weld, but it did mean that, and you can see there how thin that's gone, just from blending in the edges of the weld. So, but it's welded perfectly. It's not the end of the weld, that thin bit, I can sort that out. So with the eye welded up, I'm just going to give it a rough shaping. I'm not going to give it its final shape until it's properly ready for it, but just want to make sure everything's in the right place at this stage. So forming it square at the top. I'm not actually forging against the drift, I'm just literally guiding the material because I don't want to thin it by forging against the mandrel. So at this stage I will actually start spreading out the blade of the adze. I've actually flattened it out with a few blows before going in with the crosspeen. It just gives the crosspeen something to bite into. This was probably the most strenuous part of making the adze, was spreading out all that material. I do have a power hammer fuller that I use sometimes, but that's actually broken at the moment. I haven't really had the need to repair it yet. Like I said, that I could have done with it for this, but there we go, did it by hand. I'll address the edges as well. You can see that nasty little dip, which I'm having to work around and sort out. That's that, roughly shaped. At this stage I will lop it off the 1¼ inch bar. It's actually my first time making an adze in this manner. So let's spread it out a bit more. And give it a bit of a smoothing. This is in preparation for a carbon steel bit to be welded onto it. And I'm going to do a laid weld rather than an insert, which is why I've gone so thin on the end. So I'm just tapering the edge, again to create a welding plane rather than a shearing plane. So for the steel bit I used spring steel and I forged it down a bit to thicken it up, and again remove the shear plane on the outer edge, the inner edge. I'm just going in with a ball peen and try and curve it to match the curvature. That's the reason I can never find any chalk, by the way, I keep doing that. So it would have been cleverer to put the bend in before cutting off the spring, but there we go. I'll know that for next time. So I'm just going to lay that on top of the fire. Again, the fire's been made into a molehill to aid the welding. Because I'm welding carbon steel, I'm actually going to use borax on this, which I didn't for the eye weld. And drop a bit of borax on the mild steel. So again, it's just on the top of the fire, and the carbon steel bit isn't held on in any way, it's just sat on there. The borax will help it stick, the welding heat will help it stick. So as long as you keep it roughly level, it shouldn't fall off between the fire and the anvil. So that's tacked together. And welding. I do wish I'd left the edge of the blade a bit thicker in the mild steel bit, just because I didn't leave myself enough material to blend the weld in, so I was left with a weld line on the upper part of it, which you guys know how much I like my welds to disappear completely and never be seen again, so you can imagine how much that irritated me, and still does. Sat in front of me as I'm doing this voiceover, mocking me. So anyway, blending the outer edges. It would help if I had the right tongs for this kind of work. I'm going to make a second one at some point and stick it out for sale, see if anybody's interested in an Anglo-Saxon adze. So once the carbon steel bit's welded on, do a bit more spreading and dressing after some nice curves on the edges. Any questions or anything I've not covered in the voiceover, just pop them in the comments. So using my wide hammer for this as well because it acts like a flatter. As a work alone, I don't have a flatter. Could have done it onto the power hammer, but I've done most of this by hand and I figured that I'd do the rest of it by hand as well. You can see the line of the weld there. So I'm just using the bick as well to help curve the edges. And stick my maker's mark on. And stick a curve in the blade of the adze. So I'm just using my big hammer again and literally just lifting the piece so that the socket is higher than the part on the anvil, and that puts the curve in there. So at this stage, bang the drift in properly and form the eye. I'd have preferred to put a pole on, like with the axes, maybe do some thinner cheeks. I think it would have looked a lot nicer. But on the original one from Flixborough, this is the way it's made, so it's a reproduction, so I reproduced. The adze, that is, not me personally. Just the outside of the eyes. So it was then normalised, and she went over to the burnisher to dress that curve a bit more. Was on a bit of a short time scale. If I was doing this as a museum quality reproduction, I would have made sure that that nice curve was forged into place. So I want to make a small batch of these to see if they sell to historical parties and reenactors and traditional woodworkers and such like. I'll probably do those as forged profile rather than ground profile. Let's stick a rough edge on as well prior to heat treating. I actually lost the video of the heat treat, but it was quenched in oil and then tempered over the fire to a dark straw colour, which is why we've just skipped straight to the wire brush bit. Yeah, good clean. I like an oil finish on tools. I don't know how historically authentic it is for Anglo-Saxon, but it's quite a nice finish and it protects it from the damp as well. So quite pleased with how this came out, considering it's the first one. Learned a few things. Yeah. So hopefully you guys have maybe learned a few things as well. Have a go at making one. The first time doing an asymmetrically welded tool like this. And like I say, I'm going to have another go because it's a lot easier than a folded tool. So there we go. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. If you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoy this channel, please consider donating to the Patreon, which will help me make these videos. Links in the description. Thanks a lot for this week's donors, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.